Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Supply Chain. I'm your host, Katherine McCleery, and I am broadcasting live to you from my office here in Kansas City. And I am so excited for this show and to So sorry about that technical difficulty on my side. Sorry for the lag there. We must go on, and this is live, so these things happen. I've got a great show for you, but just as a reminder for those who haven't ever watched, the Voice of Supply Chain is meant to give a highlight and to feature the voices of people in supply chain tech, and the surrounding and adjacent industries. Give them a highlight and show what amazing things these people are doing. And it's a lot less talk about work, a lot more talk about their lives. So I would love to introduce you to today's guest, Richard Martin. Welcome.
Great. Thank you. Great to be here. Also known as Ricky Martin.
I wasn't going to go there, but now that you've given me
That's
permission, it
that's
could
a, it's
happen.
all it's all good. It's all good.
Okay, so Richard, aka Ricky Martin, is the CEO of Requis, which is a capital project procurement and circular economy platform. There are two sides to the business, and we'll talk about that later. But he's got a massive experience in tech, 25 years to be exact, with companies like
Scary.
um, IBM and Nortel, VMware, 3Com. I mean, I was trying to go through your resume and there was too many companies to list. Um, but tell us a little bit about yourself um, and where you grew up, because I think that is one of the coolest parts of your entire story.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess that's a good starting point. So I'm Canadian, so polite by nature, I guess. French Canadian. I'm from Montreal originally. Was just enamored by technology out of the gate. When I was 15, somebody put me in front of a computer, and I just it really captured my imagination. And so just went off to the races with that, and just really had a lot of different activities in my youth. My uncle was a race car driver, so I have spent the time in that direction as well. I'll have played baseball for some of the time, pretty seriously getting try for some major league teams. And then just really was enamored by tech, and it's kind of like war games. I spent a long time in my once I got a computer, I spent a lot of time in my bedroom just going away at it. And then, eventually discovered modems, spent most of my money buying quicker and quicker modems, and really just spend my time across that diversity of space. A lot of time, with baseball, time with race car driving, a lot of time spent with tech in general. And so it was a really great youth. I think I was fortunate to be young at a time where it was great to be young. Everything was innocent. You could jump off the roof of the house, and your parents just told you just be careful when you do it. So it was a completely different time. Nowhere to reach anybody. So when you leave your house in the morning until you came back, no one could reach anybody. It was just whenever you were back, and I just really can't complain. I had such a tremendous youth. It's like very idyllic when you kind of think about what it would have been back then. I was just very fortunate to benefit from
Okay, I want to rewind real quick. You mentioned racing. And I'm bringing this up because I teased it in our promo, and I'm a huge
that.
fan of F1 racing. Can you just fill us in a little bit about your connection to F1 racing and just Formula in
Yeah,
general?
yeah. I was just very lucky. My uncle actually raced in one level below, Indy and Formula One at the time, which was Formula Atlantic. So I got to be at the track from a very young age. Spent a large part of my youth, at the racetrack for the entire racing season. and then started to get enamored with that myself. Obviously, I had a chance to race for Sony Honda for a few years, so I raced in a few Canadian Grand Prix in the support class, not in F1, but the support races for F1. I would refer to us as the rodeo clowns. We keep the fans entertained until the main act is there, which is clearly Formula One. But again, because it was back then, it wasn't as exclusive as it is now. So as a driver, I went to the same driver meetings as the Formula One drivers, to be able side by side with icons and heroes of mine, and it just a great time. And I spent probably until I was 22. I'm trying to think back now, 22, 23. Spent an unbelievable amount of time at the track and racing. And then you just make acquaintances that seem to bring you back to that. And, to bring it back to Requis on our team, who runs the product for us is Vinny based in Perth, Australia. A good childhood friend of his is Daniel Ricciardo, who races still today for Red Bull. And so there's just all these things that kind of always bring me back to racing. So I have to say, of course I enjoy the sport. We'll watch every F1 race live, no matter what time of the day it is, wherever it is around the world. And we're very fortunate to have a good amount of races in the US now, or in North America, I should say, the Canadian Grand Prix in Texas, Las Vegas, of course, Mexico as well. So just a good variety in our hemisphere as well.
I'm a huge fan of Daniel Ricciardo,
Yeah,
for
there you
those
go.
that
There you
aren't
go.
in it, um, and was so excited when I learned that from Vinny. I think half of our conversations are F1 related.
I know,
Um,
right? It takes
yeah,
time
so
away from the product. I know.
so who's your favorite driver of all time?
Well, randomly, it's gonna say, Danny's just a guy. I think he's a lot of people's favorite driver. Not only for performance, clearly he's a great driver, but he's just a very personable driver. Compared to others. For example, Kimmy will be very funny, but he's so low key, less extroverted. Who's retired now, and so just Danny's just somebody who just kind of get. So, and I would say that's not unique to me. I think it just happens to be. I think he's a great face of F1, and one day when he's not racing, I think he should be tied to the sport, be just a great ambassador for the sport.
Agreed. Okay, so you very briefly just kind of summarized your childhood before we got off on this racing tangent. But you mentioned growing up in Canada. And when we first talked about this, I thought it was so interesting how different the Canadian education system is from America. And you were able to start like a work program with IBM at a really young age. I would love for you to tell our audience about that because I thought it was so incredible. What a great opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, if there's one thing I'd be passionate about this in my retirement, if there was ever such a thing, it would be kind of morphing to a different kind of education system. The one that I experienced wasn't a Canadian one as much as a French one. So it's the province of Quebec, which mimics more what's happening in Europe, if you will. And what I liked about that system is, if I start with the US system, it seems to be like you're a college graduate or you're some kind of, I don't want to say failure, but you haven't really achieved what you could have achieved if you weren't a college graduate. And, I was fortunate, when I went to school that there was actually viable exits every way along the way. And a good example of that, at the end of high school, the last 2 years, I think when I was studying, if you wanted to pick something that didn't necessarily need a college degree, you could do that. In the last 2 years, you had to focus in that space, and then you'd also have, some work experience in it. So you'd be connected with, if you wanted, for example, if you wanted to go into drafting or construction or whatever it was, then you'd kind of go into that space and spend some time with professionals in that space. Could be plumbing, anything of that nature. And then the same thing for firemen at our school. We actually had a program specifically for firemen who wanted to go in that, so they could exit with a high school degree, but really based having studied also specifically, things about becoming a fireman, related to that. And so it's very specific. You have this kind of great exit there, and it's successful. You graduate. It's well regarded. You move on to the next phase of your life, and it really fills all those roles that are required. And then before what we would recognize as college in the US, there's a kind of a college, if you will, in the French system. And that also has like a 2 or 3 year program that allows you again some other kinds of exits. For example, if you want to become at the time a software programmer or things of that nature, you had the kind of exits that happen there, or maybe more technical type of exits would happen at that perspective. And then if you were motivated and went on to what we would think about college, a 4 year degree, then you could really focus on, for example, engineering or, doctorate or whatever, whatever you want to do that requires that further study. And the point of that system, although I don't want to represent that as perfect. I'm sure it had its flaws, not were not visible to me, but you had all these incredibly successful exits, right? These paths that it wasn't like, oh, are you a high school graduate or a college graduate? It really wasn't about that. It's about, what are you trying to do and what kind of feeds you into that exit. And as I said before, you becoming an intern into that. In my case, I was able to, when I went to the college level, maybe we refer to as community college here, but you have to go there before you go to university in the French in Quebec. I studied in programming and got a chance right away to have internships with Air Canada and IBM, and started having exposure immediately, which really lended itself well as well to my way of learning. I'm a very visual, hands-on kind of a learner, and so when you complement those two things together, one, it tells you very quickly, is this something I want to be doing for an extended period of my life? And then two is you really start to absorb it so much quicker, better from my perspective. And then you're kind of almost treated as a peer, like somebody who's onboarding in this space. And so when you go back to school, you're like, hey, I know what I want to do. I know where the fit is. I know what I'm trying to, when I'm trying to draft behind. And I think that made it easier as well. So again, I'm sure it's not perfect, but I think that, and the show Dirty Jobs here, and I forget the name of the host, so I feel terrible, but that show of Dirty Jobs was a good example of creating exits at all sorts of levels where you could become an industrial welder and be making 6 figures a year very comfortably, and traveling the world, and also the thing where you didn't have to go to college to do that, and you could be very good and enamored and compelled by doing that. And I think that's a good example, if you will, of what I'm referring to.
It sounds incredible. I wish that we had that here in the States. Maybe there's something similar in some school districts, but I love that you had that opportunity and to be able to work for a company like IBM at such a young age. Do you think that helped shaped the rest of your career?
Yeah, it crystallized what I was thinking about. I was very enamored by computers, but I had the chance to work at IBM when I was 15 and newly 15, so right on the edge, and just on the edge of turning 15, and to be in that environment, in a professional environment. And and by the way, you learn a lot of things that are just unrelated to to scholastic things. I remember one of our first day, I was with two friends of mine who all went to IBM as a threesome, and one of my friends wasn't wearing a tie, and the person onboarding us, without ever lifting their head from the desk, said, "Just as a reminder, we wear ties at IBM." And it was just kind of as and never even looked at him, or we never even made eye contact. And it was like, okay, you start to learn about interacting in a professional setting, right? So there's all sorts of other benefits that come from that.
By the way, we have a comment from somebody watching. Evan reminded us the host of Dirty Jobs was Mike Rowe.
Oh yeah, micro. Thank you, I mean that's embarrassing because I also watch his podcast, so it's kind of I don't have a really good reason not to remember his name, and I'm a huge fan of his, by the way. I think he's great.
Yeah, he's a great host, fun to watch for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the education system and having that early opportunity to develop your skills and really hone in on what you're good at. I looked through your job experience, and there's, like I said earlier, there's just too much to go through. But as I'm
That
looking
just that
at
just proves
your,
I'm old.
no, it just you've been employed a lot, and you've had a lot of experience.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
Sales, product management. I even saw there was like leadership over marketing. How did all these roles help you then make a transition into alliance operations when you went to VMware?
Well, I think for me, if I first kind of talk about VMware was an unbelievable place. I'll never say enough good things about VMware, the people I interacted with, the leadership, Diane Mendel, all of them. Carl Eschenbach is now the CEO of Workday. I can't say enough good things about that experience in so many ways. But I will talk about more. If you think about alliance management, one things about that is sometimes it's oversimplified. Alliance management is about running your own business view, right? So you establish an alliance with a company. It'll have some kind of joint venture-ish feel to it, meaning there'll probably be some joint go-to-market tied to it. You're going to need to work with all the different groups within that group. So, I mean, you'll be interacting with marketing people over at that company and salespeople, and maybe if there's a technical side, you'll be engaging, on the technical side. And I think the wrong way to think about alliance management is to think of it as a single thread, meaning I'm the alliance manager, I deal with one alliance manager, and then that's where the relationship exists. I think that's the wrong way to think about it. I think if you want to think about the alliance manager role, it's somebody who's able to stitch the organizations together across all the functions that are required to be successful in that alliance. And there's going to be numerous, there may be, there could be a service aspect, there could be a support aspect. And so the ability to optimally stitch the organizations together is what makes an alliance successful. And if you start with that premise and you kind of step back from that, that's where you realize that all the diversity of experience that we talked about just kind of manifests itself now in that stitching, right? So having spent time in development, product management, marketing, operations, all those things just manifest themselves in those alliances, right? Now, of course, some alliances might be more temporal than others. Some are longer lasting and will have a more a longer engagement to them. But I really think it's invaluable to bring all those pieces to it. And the way, and a good example is if I were doing something jointly with another organization, it's not going to, I don't want it to be me selling and the other alliance manager selling, we're selling this. What we need to do is create an environment and create a process in which both of our sales teams are going to market and we're 1 + 1 = 3, and they're engaged together and they start to work together, and we're not even involved in that. They start to have their own cadences, right? And so that's where, if I was connecting the dots between a variety of experience to the alliance management role, that's the way I would kind of bring that together.
Okay. Yeah, I was so curious to see that kind of sidestep, or I guess it's a step up where you are combining so much together in one role with a perspective from each of those areas. So I thought that was really cool. And I meant to ask you before we jumped into, the main part of your career, um, I was going to ask you after your higher education experience, you know, what were you in your mind, think back to that time, what were you planning on doing after college and university? And then did it go as planned for you?
Yeah, it actually did not go as planned, which is kind of interesting, right? One of the things I think that's the hallmark of for me is not that everything went smoothly, but everything, the resilience, everything just eventually kind of fit together, right? And when I was finishing college, university, I should say, I thought I'd work for IBM. It was kind of a slam dunk, that was what was going to happen. And then there were some changes occurred around our graduation date, and then that was not available. That kind of, that was going to be the position. And then I actually ended up landing at a much better place for me, not better than IBM, but just better for what I was trying to do. And so, I planned to go into software development. I really wanted to be more on the research side versus development. R&D is a real misnomer. Normally, you're doing research or you're doing development. You're not doing both of those together. It's possible, but that's not really the case. And I was really more interested in the R side of it, just pushing the envelope on things, seeing what happens, breaking things, right? And so I got when it didn't work out with IBM, ended up with Bell Northern Research and joined the scientific staff there. And then I was only in big R. There was really no development. And so we got to work on just solving all these what if problems. At the time, this is going to sound ancient now, but speech recognition, character recognition, what could we do better with faxes, voice recognition, in both directions. It's just like a time where you have to try different things. And I had been on the internet for a long time back then, back when it was a very kind of VT100 style interaction with the web, early on. And then with a colleague of mine, I ended up designing a browser at the time, and having our own browser, a window-based kind of management of the internet, to the as best you can, because of course you're only working on the client side of that, so there's no, you don't get any other side to it. But and it's just like, and it was really more out of necessity. But what happens is I couldn't have had that uh, possibility without landing in that role, which is like, hey, you're now doing research. What do we want to work on? What are we doing here today? What are we? And I have to tell you that that's, even though it was one of my lowest paying job in my history, it's probably one of the most compelling times of my life. I worked overnight many times. Once we had the president of Bell Northern Research, kind of a Bell Labs equivalent. He was coming through, and I just worked overnight 2 nights, and then they let me know that morning, "Hey, he's going to come and see the stuff you're working on." And I was like, I couldn't be more disheveled, Catherine. I mean, it looked like I had been through two hurricanes and a tornado. But he was so great because he was like super understanding, and he knew when I mean, he understood. Why it looked that way, what was going on, and how my cubicle looked, and everything is like, okay, and I think he left, I think he left impressed with what we're doing, but also left, I think, impressed with the commitment we had. Right, we're gonna stay here till the job is done. And again, not myself, other colleagues as well. And it's just a very compelling time.
So was that job before or after you um, tried out to be an astronaut?
Well, that's kind of funny. So, Bell Northern Research, because we were focused on the research R, like I talked about, in the same building on the same floor, we were mixed with individuals who were working for the National Scientific Research Institute, up in Canada, in Quebec. And so we were just completely merged, working together. And because a lot of what we do would kind of interact with each other because of the research component. And then at some point, it actually was on the tail end of that. So I was actually
Okay.
on the end of kind of my Bellmoser research, and then they sent out, that the Canada was going to be joining the U.S. space program. Canada was going to make the arm for the shuttle, and then I think as part of that, we got to have astronauts in the program. And then they send out, I'm sure a lot of different audiences, including ours, said, "Hey, we're looking for people who are focused on science. Would you be interested?" And of course, I would have jumped in the shuttle that afternoon if I could. So I was like, "Yes, of course, I'm interested." So I just responded positively. There was some preliminary questions in that, but as it would be, I never heard back. But I will say that somebody who worked where I worked, and I didn't work with her, so I don't want to misrepresent, but we worked at the same company. And then she got, we were in the same, in the same building, in Montreal. We actually never met, to be honest, but she got selected, and then she flew two missions, on the shuttle. So what I'll say is that it makes it more real when it's an arm's length from you. Sometimes things feel like they're far away, not a possibility. That to me made it feel like, oh, it's kind of that sliding door movie, right? One slide, one door opens, one door closes. So close to that, like, so I think what that, kind of reinforced in me, although it's kind of in this DNA of thinking, is to just like, to just don't stop till somebody tells you to stop. Don't, if you want to do something, I'm going to keep moving till somebody physically, ties me down, and or I can't, move forward. And that was a good example of that. And I would have never guessed that that was even a possibility to be even, you know, to be, again, properly represent. I'm on the very periphery of that whole process, but even to be there for me is like, an incredible honor. It's shocking.
That's how I feel about a lot of the little bits and pieces of your timeline that we talked about in your life. There's just so many moments where I'm like, how does one person have all of this in one life playing baseball, being close to racing, the all of the
Yeah.
opportunities that you've had in your young life. And then I also have in my notes here that you went to Harvard to study hydrocarbon. Was that like in your
Uh, uh,
later years where you're like, I want to do
it,
another study?
it was, and what I'll say, the way you said before is, to quote George Costanza of Seinfeld, "If you condense my entire life into one day, it's impressive."
Yeah.
So, so, yeah. Well, no, what happens, and this I'm going to make a corollary back to what I'm super passionate about, which is really education. There's a website that, and again, I'm not promoting any kind of way. I have no link to it. Coursera, which allows you to access unbelievable content from great universities across the world. And because I'm French Canadian, I actually also use Coursera to access French content from French universities. But when I started to work, and we started to work more with energy companies, and I became, by inherently a focus of our company, I like to know what I'm working on, and so I just got onto Coursera and then started to really just look for programs related, or classes or courses related to what we do. And so that's a good example of, I have done a lot of classes related, to hydrocarbons, upstream, downstream, midstream, making sure that I understood the business. And this is not necessary potentially for everybody, but I like to have a good understanding of the things that I'm on. So meaning, if one day, we engage, and I won't pretend to know something, but chances are tomorrow I'll know about it if I need to know about it. And that was a good example of that. But relate to hydrocarbon, Harvard actually, that was related to, the focus there was really to do a degree more focused on, public policy and things of that nature. So I attended courses from the Kennedy School of Government through the Extension School, because another great way to go to great universities at a reasonable cost is you can attend classes at Harvard by, signing up to the Extension School and going through those classes. And if there's room, then you can attend those classes. And so it's kind of about the resiliency, if you will. I actually transparently, and I don't mind, going over my multiple failures with you. I applied to Harvard to do my BA, did not get in. And then I figured, well, I was like, well, how can I sit in a class here? What would it take for me to sit in a class here? And that's when I figured out through the extension school I could do that. And then I ended up doing, 5 or 6 classes out of a master's. But then eventually I had to drop out as we start to have kids. And I was actually traveling to Boston every week, to Cambridge for that. So that came to an end for for family reasons. But I think that, and one of the things people should take away listening to this is there's so many ways to get unbelievable education without spending that crazy amount. Or maybe you're not walking into the front door, and you know what, you're sitting in the same classroom when you walk in the side door.
Well, I never even knew that there was an extension program. I'm sure that there's lots of universities that have that. So I appreciate you providing a little bit more detail on that. That education is much more
Yeah,
accessible.
my pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I have this question in the back of my mind, and I'm sorry, we haven't talked about this before, but I'm just wondering, with your experience in tech, and we haven't really gotten into Requis where you're at now, which is deeply rooted in a lot of supply chain activities, which I'm sure people are like, when are we
It
going to
is.
get to the supply chain part of it? Um,
Yeah, they're right.
but my question is, at any point when you're in tech, um, did you have exposure to supply chain activities or procurement in any way? Was that something that you got access to or got to see from a different perspective?
Yeah, I did, and I would say that, not to misrepresent, I was never a procurement professional, but I think, like so much, even procurement professionals, I think you get thrust into the role in some ways as you're going along, where they're not, back then, not necessarily a plan. And the two ways I got exposed to it is, one is when I work at Nortel, our customers, I designed networks for our customers as a network engineer, that could be a company, it could be a city, a state, a county. Just you're designing large networks, and then that would turn into, okay, well, now we're going to implement this, and now we have to procure everything we need to implement this, and there really is. There's no one to point to. There's project managers, of course, which is part of what I would do a little bit, and then so you're kind of thrust into the procurement side of it. And I would say it's something that I did non-professionally, and I'm sure I could have done better. But I spent, those projects all had a large procurement component, related to them. Some of them even, the procurement including land procurement, meaning if we needed to get, for example, a fiber optic, across different regions, then we would engage with a lot of times utilities, for example, railroads, because they own contiguous land, and so you have to figure out, procuring rights to it, or something of that nature. So there's that'd be one exposure to it. But again, as a not as a procurement professional, I think the other one was kind of in data centers and just acquiring, storage, networking, compute power for data centers. I spent some time in that space because I played a role in helping the configuration of that. Again, not me being the primary person, but I think as soon as I was exposed to that second time, I kind of felt things could be done better. It kind of felt suboptimal the way we were approaching and how procurement was happening, and it was really not about the people not being good. It was about the processes, and the tools and platforms were just not there. So that'd be kind of the second way I've been exposed to it. But I've never been a procurement professional myself. But of course, given what we've been doing now for the past 6 years, I've had a chance to meet so many, and I think what I take away from that, Catherine, is that the backgrounds are so varied. Like we're talking here today. When you sit down with somebody at a conference or whatever it is, or something, and then their background, you're not. It's not like they started in procurement out of school. They were doing something totally different, and then somehow ended up in procurement. And those rich backgrounds, I think, really help out when you get to the procurement, because they bring a different angles, different viewpoints to it. They wouldn't, I wouldn't look at it the way they're looking at it, but then when they're going through their analogy, like, that makes a lot of sense. And then I internalize that for Requis, obviously, in terms of what we're doing. So yeah, I think that's my exposure to it initially.
Yeah, and that reminds me of, kind of the opening question. I don't know if you've ever listened to, the Art of Procurement podcast. Phil Eidson, shout out Art of Procurement. Phil Eidson always starts his interviews asking, if the guest found procurement or if procurement found them. And
Yeah,
9
yeah,
times out of 10, procurement found them, right,
yeah,
through
yeah.
all the turns of their
Uh,
career path.
yeah. Well, that's a lot better said than I say it, and I think that I think that's very correct. I think that's right, or it
I
feels
wanna
right to me.
Yeah, I think that's the general consensus. Um, Someone on the comments said something really nice, and I'm just gonna, highlight it for you right now. This is from Pratibha. Richard, in addition to the available opportunity for education, my takeaway is your curiosity to learn. I see the curiosity as what made you take action to learn all the different things that makes you who you are today. So that is a really great observation from the
Wow.
first, half of our show here.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you
I
for the
appreciate
comment.
that. Yeah, thank you.
And I totally forgot to say this at the beginning, but if anybody watching has questions for Richard, you can go ahead and put them in the comments. I do see it, and we'll be sure to get them covered. Um, and I think I'm ready to lean in a little bit more to the supply chain side of things right now. And in talking to you, I think a lot of the themes that I hear from you is, again, curiosity, learning. Um, you seem to be a high performance individual and also mission driven. And having worked with Requis myself, for the better part of a year, I fell in love with the mission of, creating a more sustainable supply chain for capital projects and, a more circular, procurement process for capital projects. Can you tell me a little bit about this mission and what drew you to it for, when you joined Requis?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate that. And I'll just say, Requis is very lucky to have you. So we, it's kind of like we talked about. Did we find Catherine or Catherine found us? I'm not sure, but we're happy about the outcomes. I'm just gonna say that. Yeah, I mean, I think from our perspective, and we're talking about procurement, I think when you think about what we focus on, which are large capital projects, there's a lot of inherent waste that occurs there, and it's very large waste. They're big projects, it's big waste. And again, it's not because the people are great people, they're really incredibly smart and brilliant people, but the overall process of working, the method of working together, the tools are just suboptimal, right? And it's hard to enable a group of people, to do better. I mean, you by yourself could do better, but then try to, enable a group often will be global in nature. It's just very challenging. So, when we came across this, there's obviously the business opportunity. Like any, of course, you're starting a company, you're like, okay, well, what's the opportunity? Can we make money? All that, which is great. But I think if that's your passion, I don't think that's going to work. Your passion has to be about what the outcomes you're driving from that business. And one of the outcomes that we saw, and we refer to ourselves much more today as an AI enabled circularity company, because that turns out to be the core of what really enamors us about the idea of taking first of all, procuring better so less surplus is created, but whatever surplus is created, being able to recirculate that into the economy as quickly as possible, so that we're avoiding those things going all the way to becoming landfill, or one step before that, being recycled, which is also a good outcome, but not the ideal outcome. The ideal outcome is to reuse assets in the way they were intended, by people, or by companies, organizations that are going to see the same value in that asset, right? And I think that part kind of crystallize our passion about, what could we do there. So we've, since the very first day we launched Requis, we've thought of carbon management the same way we think of asset management or financial management. It's at the very core of the way we think. It doesn't mean every company will use it, or every project will use it, or everybody is at the same maturity in relation to that. But I think it was important for us to make sure that it was there if somebody wanted to focus on that. I think what we find today is, and this is expressed in my words, but I think there's a little bit of carbon fatigue out there, right? I mean, everybody's talked about having, goals and NZ targets. A lot of different audits have come out by, firms like McKinsey and others, and they're, companies and countries and governments are really not doing very well towards those 2030 commits. And when those 2030 commits were made, it felt like they were incredibly, a long time away. Now they're 5 years away, right? And so, the I think and this is transcends sustainability, but I'll describe it in the context of sustainability. I think we're more interested in having an impact, providing value, than the fashion related to that value, right? And so if we stick to the sustainability one, there's a lot of value. There's a lot of talk about sustainability, and that's great. And we can't help or hurt that. That's not our role. Our role is to make sure that we harness intent and enable that intent to be taken to action. Right. That's where we play a role. And so we're more focused around the value that people, the organizations, or I'll refer to our users as practitioners. I'm interested in what the values for the practitioner. Good examples along our path is, people don't necessarily know my background, so I'll get, and we've mentioned before, I worked on blockchain a long time ago. It wasn't even called blockchain when I worked on it. And what happens is people say, oh, we're doing a blockchain. Well, I'm not really interested in blockchain. I'm interested in outcomes and value. And if there's something that we can leverage blockchain to do better for folks, then we want to look at it. Same thing with AI, and you already know this about me, Catherine. I was a little bit of a negative on AI because it felt like everybody was flying the AI flag, as a fashion statement. But we were like,
And they
I
are.
my yeah, I think a lot of people are. Hopefully less. Hopefully, we're getting to different points. I will say I get a lot of value of Chat GPT when I need to write content, so I'll admit that. So that's good. That's value. But so when we were talking AI at the beginning, the team would tell you, and I was a little bit, I pushed back on AI at the beginning, and then finally they're like, hey, look, here's what we can do with AI, and they had a use case around analytics, and we have so much data at Requis. We have so much data related to procurement and projects, and we can produce all these visualizations, but it feels like they're underused because there's an amount of work between the data and getting the valuable insight that requires somebody to do a little bit of, have to invest a little bit of time. And the AI kind of flatten that mountain a little bit by, for example, now on the Reckless platform, if you're looking, for example, a scatter plot that has a lot of detail behind it, you'll have the AI overlay, generative AI overlay that says, hey, here's what's happening in this scatter plot, right? Here's what's happening. And then we can actually push that up to say, here are potential actions that impact that, or assuming that there's something, a gap of some kind, right? So, somebody might say, well, Reckless, we never talked about AI. We talked about the solution, the value, what what you're getting. But today we are talking about the AI a little bit more because I think that's what's a little bit expected. But we're really excited about the value of the AI. We're excited about the value of sustainability and carbon management. And the fashion side is not kind of our, where we play. We play in enabling, capturing, I would say harnessing intent into action and outcomes.
Do you feel that the fashion side of, sustainability in the last few years has been impeding progress, like, for companies that are really trying to achieve real outcomes? Has it kind of created a distraction for, the value and
Yeah,
outcomes that you're talking about?
yeah. I, you know, I hope this answers the question, but I'm going to start a little bit further. I think we have to stop thinking about them differently, right? We have to about think augmenting an outcome versus two different things. And for example, in procurement, if you're thinking about procurement, so and we just really reduced it down to some basic items. You want to spend less, you want higher quality, you want to get it quicker. Those are just natural truths, right? As a consumer, you got to understand those natural truths, right? So now the question is, I feel like now it's like, oh, do you want that or do you want sustainability? Right? I feel like people feel like there's this decision needs to be made and then sustainability loses out. But I think the mistake is not in the decision, but it's in the question, right? The question is not sustainability, or the question is, how does sustainability really augment the outcomes you're looking for, right? And so circularity is a great example. When assets circulate to projects, on our platform, you have these high value assets that are going to be sold to another project for a lot less than they're worth, but the organization selling it will get a lot more than they ever got for than before. The buying organization will get it quicker. And then all of a sudden, you take a look at that, you see, well, every participant advanced their procurement objective through a sustainable activity, right? So I think that what happens is, I think there, to your point, your question, I think the sustainability kind of loses out when we have this false narrative about one or the other. I think they need to be brought together, and it requires a little bit of focus. It requires some determination. It's easy. It's easy to not take the few additional steps to have such a much better outcome, right? And that's when we finally engage with companies. And I'm not faulting any company or practitioners. As I said, we're very fortunate on our platform to have some of the best companies in the world and the best, smartest people in the world. But there is a fatigue because, the other thing I'll tie this to procurement, Catherine, which is kind of interesting, is you have these commitments that are made, and you're like, okay, a company made these commitments. And you're like, well, how will these commitments be achieved? And often, inherently, it lands on the procurement team because let's take business out of it. Let's focus on you. And somebody says, well, Catherine needs to be, here's your sustainability objective, or Catherine, here's what it is. I'm like, okay, now how will I observe that you're driving towards those actions? And what I will do to do that is I'm going to measure the ways that you procure and consume. That's what I'm going to do. That's where the responsibility lies to achieve the target, right? And for a company, it's the same thing. Somebody makes a commitment, but what really has to change and who ends up owning it in some ways when it's actually done is the procurement team. They have to procure in a more sustainable way. They have to procure more sustainable assets or services. So it really manifests itself in the procurement team. And to be honest, those procurement people, they're already doing so much as it is that this additional responsibility overlays, like on Monday it's cut costs, and on Tuesday it's going to do it faster, on Wednesday it's like, yeah, try to be sustainable. It's like, okay, well, okay, sure, So that's what I think, and I think that the beauty of a platform like Request and other platforms that are going this way is to actually have a sustainability lever in front of you that you can pull, where you can take some action and do something versus now it's kind of hard to think about what that is. And it doesn't mean every action you take can meet sustainability. You might need to acquire something. There's no other way than to get that developed, to get that manufactured from scratch. Of all the people who manufacture it, there may be no way to really get that manufactured as sustainably as you'd like. So there's going to be exceptions, right? But you're trying to minimize those and maximize the amount of time where you can say, hey, the Biden administration canceled the Trans-Canada pipeline. We have thousands of miles of tubular underground. Let's see how we can get those into existing projects that can use those tubulars and save the need for those to be remanufactured from scratch, and therefore avoiding a huge carbon footprint, getting it for less, and the seller recovering more than they would on it. Everybody, the whole ecosystem benefits, as well as sustainability wins in that situation.
So that's the ideal state, and I love it. I that vision, that is what motivated me, to work with Requis, because I loved that idea of, marrying your procurement function within capital projects to circular activities. So, how far away are we from that becoming more standard, where it's not just Requis customers just using the capital project procurement solutions, and just customers using the circular marketplace?
Yeah.
How soon, and what is it going to take to bring those companies, those two functions under one umbrella for a company? Is that impossible?
Yeah. Well, I think what happens is, w- you know, when we talk about a company at Requis, and we do make this mistake, so we talk about one company as an entity, but the reality is that a company is actually a collection of, there's living organisms under there, which will be, a geographic team. There'll be a project team. There'll be another functional team that'll sit there. And so what happens is, it's not like we're asking one individual to just change their behavior. They're not even in the same group, same geography, same function, same whatever. So I think that there's a longer arc for that to happen. But I think there's a more practical thing. And I hate to ask people to boil the ocean because it's not going to boil. But it's easy for you to say, hey, in what I do, I'm a practitioner. Here's what I do. Here's how I could impact what I'm doing. And by the way, get better KPIs for myself, selfishly. Get drive better KPIs for myself and a better outcome, right? And so really that what we're trying to do is help practitioners do that. The ones that are not able to do that, again, it's not like they're bad or evil anyway. There's an unbelievable amount of conflicting responsibilities sitting on people. And so what we're trying to do is, what at Reckless is, we're trying to remove, or we're trying to make it easier for them to think about the sustainability part of it, if they can, if they can, fit that into the work that they're accomplishing. So I think that that's a perspective. In terms of how long, the other way I would answer that is, unfortunately, the circularity, ratio is actually going down, from year to year. And I can't remember they were exactly to look at them recently, but of course they're in single digits, and they were actually declining. And there could be a lot of things tied to that. The pandemic was a huge, supply chain disruptor, and so there could be different kinds of, causes for that. But even in just the space we focus on today, which again, we're agnostic, but the majority of our customers tend to be in the energy space. And there's even the energy space, there's unbelievable opportunity for us to evolve that. We have individual customers with hundreds of millions, some with billions in surplus that could be recirculated. And we need to get to those assets quicker to put them in front of projects quicker who will consider them, right? One good example, some things that hurt us a little bit, Catherine, are some sayings like, one is none, two is one. And so when everybody applies that along the way, you end up with 10 instead of one, right? Because everybody kind of, increase it. So we have to be a little bit more efficient at that. We also have to be a little bit more the practitioners be willing to consider non-new items for for different kinds of uses, right? And so uh, clearly, if you're, for example, if you're one of our customers and you're going to put a valve down on the bottom of the ocean, you're going to make sure that valve has all the proper certifications and all that. It's probably going to be a new product, and because the risk level is so high for that asset that you're going to err on the side of caution, and I think we all appreciate that, right? Understandably.
Right.
But then there'll be other assets that might not represent the same level of risk or concern, where we're able to provide the same level of of certification and assurance. Where at those levels, then we can apply more of the circularity principles. And there's unbelievable people doing great work in kind of promoting circularity. But our Requis, our role is, I've spent almost no time in this kind of environment, which I actually enjoy, but our time has really been on thinking about how do we enable it, how do we change the outcome, like what do we need to be doing where people will be motivated to kind of move forward. And the motivations from my perspective are all related to profitability for both organizations, and because lower cost, all the aspects, all the aspects I'm talking about really relate well to profitability, right? And I think when that epiphany happens, when you realize, oh, actually these actions lead to better profitability, wow, there's like an epiphany, right? And so now you're able to, again, as I said, it's not in every case, but where applicable, you're starting to change the behaviors, and then you're starting to change those outcomes.
I love that. And that leads me right into my very last question because we just have a few minutes left. I usually like to end these asking what makes a good supply chain leader in 2024. But I think I'd like to switch that up a little bit. For somebody who is in either a sourcing, supply chain procurement type of role, who cares about sustainability, who cares about carbon emissions personally, how can that supply chain professional bring that to the surface for their organization? How can they make a bigger impact? Like advice for those people that are like, oh, I think I'm identifying with the person that Richard is talking about. Like, what should I do, you know, in my next
Right.
project?
Yeah. Well, the first thing I would say, and answer your question, what makes a good supply chain person, I'll answer that really quickly. I think it's about being humble and, really taking in the information from all angles, the advice from all angles, and being able to look at things in a way that, you're not married to a solution, right? You're married to the idea of an outcome, and many solutions might lead there, right? So I think that that's, what I would think about if I had to net it really quickly. I think, in terms of me advising, supply chain professionals or procurement professionals specifically, and I just want to say I've had the benefit of interacting with many, and normally the advice goes the other way. They've been an unbelievable source for Requis, just to be super clear. And I learned there's no one conversation where I'm learning something that to them is mundane, and to me, I'm like, oh my god, like I hadn't thought about, I didn't look at that. So normally it goes the other direction. But if I had to something to contribute back, would be a little bit what we just talked about, is to not boil the ocean and really figure out, don't don't try to push the sustainability agenda. And I feel like that's what the fatigue's been created. Try to figure out what, from a sustainability and in our case circularity perspective, can be embedded into what you're doing, and then that gets tied to better profitability for that company. And then that's the message is about better profitability. And again, below that is, the lower cost, higher returns, whatever. Because when you're circulating, there's two things happening, right? You're trying to uh, you're trying to purchase a lower cost, and then when you have surplus, you want to sell it at a higher cost, right? And so those all of that really leads to higher profitability. So my advice would be when you're thinking about that is don't drive the sustainability agenda, drive the profitability agenda, and then figuring out what the role of sustainability is in that to change that, right? I think that's the way to have an impact. And I'd say to start, and I do this with everything in my life, and I don't know if it's laziness or whatever, but I always try to start like, what is the low hanging fruit here? What is the easiest thing that I can have a win at? We're going to have a win right now, and then build on that win. And I think it's important to it, I think it's easy to be too enamored by the long-term goal of sustainability, circular, whatever, but kind of losing sight of, it's a journey to get there. It's not going to be tomorrow, right? A good example, and I'm not trying to throw shade on anybody, but it doesn't help that, a good example is, I was in Houston a year ago or two, I don't remember when, and we were meeting with some potential partners, and we happened to be at a bank building that were protesting a large energy company, and they're protesting them so the bank would no longer take their banking. And what was interesting is that same energy company on our platform was running some of the largest sustainability projects in the world, right? And so what happens is, you know, it's easy to get caught up in it, but it's a little bit more complex. It's not like there's bad people and good people. I think everybody's generally trying to do the same thing, and the way for the procurement professional and practitioner to have an impact is to infuse that sustainability into better profitability, and that'll drive the action and the adoption and kind of the baby step moving forward. And if everybody's kind of doing that at once, it just starts to become part of the DNA. And so if I had a small contribution to make, I think that would be it.
I love it. That was perfect. A nice wrap up of um, what Requis does, the vision, how people can make a difference, make an impact, and it really is the positioning of outcomes versus utilizing a concept of sustainability as the end goal, where sustainability can be the driver of your desired outcome. So love that perspective. That really like helped me kind of close the gap in my understanding, honestly, in this actual live moment. So thank you.
That's funny. And what I'll say is that our customers, the practice, the user of the Request, and throughout my entire career, they're the ones who really drive the agenda. I've been super fortunate, Katherine, being great companies. We talked about VMware, so I'll pick that one. Our customers just kind of drove forward there. They took the virtualization and then, really drove the solutions forward, and then they become, and partners as well, by the way. And then they kind of take the torch and run with it. You know what I'm trying to say? And then in turn they become the beacon. And then you're like, then you learn something, and then you leapfrog them, and you say, oh well, here's something, And so I think there's a partnership that forms there, and at least that's the way it feels, to me.
And I think that's the way it should be for technology companies that are out there trying to do more than make money, serving real needs for customers and making a difference for them. Um, I just want to say thank you. This has been so much fun. I appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule to come and share your journey, your life, career, and all of the details in between with the Voice of Supply Chain audience.
No, well, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for tolerating my story. I mean, I'm glad we got to. I'm glad we got to. So, hopefully, it's more valuable related to the supply chain and procurement stuff itself. But thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, and I really think think about what makes a difference. You ask from a practitioner perspective. I think these kind of environments, like this, for example, this podcast, Calvin, on its own, I'm not saying it change the world, but if we have more of these kind of forums, right? they create centers of gravity for the conversation to happen, right? I think this is part of that transition, that successful change as well. So I really appreciate you taking the time as well today with this.
It's been my pleasure. And for those watching, if you are curious about Requis and their mission for circularity and more sustainability and capital project procurement, you can go to their website, requis.com. You can connect with Richard on LinkedIn, Richard Martin. You don't have Ricky Martin in your title. However,
I do not.
if you DM him, I dare you to use that. um,
People used to call me that before because I'm older, but I feel like I lost that title, and that's fine. It's all good.
Well, join us next time. October 16th, we're bringing on Tom Mills, the procurement protagonist. Many of you are very familiar with him and his newsletter. I can't wait for that one. But until then, do your thing, supply chain. It's been so great to have you on today, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.